welcome back to my channel, Beautiful Minutia. If you're new here, my name is Tiffany, and today I'm doing something a little bit different. I am recommending to you 4 books that I really love all about prayer. I'm not sure I've done a video like this before in terms of taking spiritual discipline and recommending books surrounding that. I have talked at length about spiritual books that I'm reading in wrap-ups on my channel or vlogs or things like that, or Christian nonfiction read-alongs that I've either hosted or participated in on other people's channels. So it's definitely not something that I have mentioned a lot of these books on my channel before, but it's kind of been spaced out. And I thought, as we are in Holy Week this week and kind of focusing more probably on spiritual disciplines and Jesus and all of those kinds of things, it feels like a really perfect time to be suggesting some of these books to you. The first book that I'm going to talk about is actually my favorite book on prayer that I've ever read. Completely changed how I saw prayer and how I prayed, and that book is If You Will Ask by Oswald Chambers. Oswald Chambers is known for his devotional book called My Utmost for His Highest, which has excerpts from his sermons, and there's one for every single day of the year. This book is different in that it is a concentrated book on one subject, that subject being prayer. So this goes through why prayer is important, what prayer is intended to be, what do we do when God is silent in prayer, intercession in prayer, persistence in prayer, all of that kind of good stuff. It is this tiny, tiny little volume filled with so much depth, and it's just incredible. It is one of my favorites. I'm gonna read a quote from it. If we look on prayer as a means of developing ourselves, there's nothing in it at all, and we do not find that idea in the Bible. Prayer is other than meditation. It develops the life of God in us. When a man is born from above, the life of the Son of God begins in him, and he can either starve that life or nourish it. Prayer nourishes the life of God. We generally look upon prayer as a means of getting things for ourselves, but the biblical idea of prayer is that God's holiness, purpose, and wise order may be brought about. So that's literally from the first chapter, and it is just like a wealth of what prayer is intended to be, what we see reflected in scripture about prayer, and all of that kind of stuff. It changed how I saw prayer, and it changed how I pray. So if there's one book that you pick up on prayer, I highly recommend it be this one. Next up, I'm going to talk about a book that I'm currently in the progress of reading, and that is With Christ in the School of Prayer by Andrew Murray. I feel like I can wholeheartedly recommend this one, though I've not quite yet finished it. It is actually the first book that my husband, who is a pastor, ever read on prayer, and it completely changed his prayer life, and it's still one of his favorites. So I feel pretty safe recommending it, even though I haven't completely finished it yet. This book focuses specifically on the teachings of Christ on prayer, and it's divided into 31 chapters, very, very short, with a prayer at the end of each chapter. So it works really, really well as a daily reading for a month, or at least a month that has 31 days. So just a couple of chapter titles for you so you can kind of get a sense of some of the things that this book covers. It starts with the only teacher, so talking about how Christ is the one who teaches us how to pray. We've got the model prayer, the infinite fatherliness of God, the all-comprehensible gift. Prayer must be definite, the secret of believing prayer, the power of united prayer, prayer in harmony with God, the word and prayer, obedience, the path to power in prayer, and the ministry of intercession, which I know there's another Andrew Murray book on prayer called The Ministry of Intercession, which I feel like probably further expounds upon that chapter. But this book has been so incredible. It's taken passages that I'm really familiar with, parables like The Friend at Midnight or The Persistent Widow, and helped me look at them differently. I've always looked at them as persistence in prayer, but it's really helped me to look differently on intercession already. And like I said, I'm not even done with it. A really, really good example is that parable of the friend at midnight. Here's a quote from that chapter. Life as a friend of God gives us the wonderful liberty to say, I have a friend to whom I can go, even at midnight. And how much better it is when I can go in the very spirit of friendliness and kindness I look for in God, seeking to help my friend as I want God to help me. When I go to God in prayer, he always looks at the aim of my petition. If it is merely for my own comfort or joy that I seek his grace, I do not receive it. But if I want him to be glorified in my dispensing his blessings to others, I will not ask in vain. If I ask for others, but want to wait until God has made me so rich that it is no sacrifice or act of faith to aid them, I will not receive an answer. My prayer will be heard if I can say that I have already asked for help for a needy friend. Even though I don't have what I need, I have already begun the work of love because I know I have a friend who will help me. And I just love that. So this theme of asking the Lord, knowing like I can't help this person who I'm praying for who really needs help, but I know someone who can. And I love that. The idea of going to God saying, I don't have what this person needs, but you do. And that is just like one little tiny excerpt from this book. It's so rich and so deep, and I don't know if I'll actually finish it by the end of the month because I've had to take it a little bit slower than I anticipated. If you're looking for a book that is really, really practical on how to pray, the first two books that I mentioned talk about how scripture teaches us to pray, how Christ teaches us to pray, what we see about prayer in the Old Testament and the New Testament. But if you're looking for something, if you say, wow, every time I try to pray, I get distracted, or I'm over here, or I tend to pray for things that I need and I feel like I don't have a well-rounded prayer life. The book that I would recommend to you, that again is one that absolutely changed how I prayed, is The Hour That Changes the World by Dick Eastman. This is a book about how to pray for a full hour, which sounds incredibly daunting unless you're in a position where maybe things are just like so overwhelming that you're literally pleading before the Lord for like an hour or something like that. But just on a regular day-to-day basis, it can be really difficult not only to find the time to pray for a full hour, but also like, what do you fill a whole hour with without being super repetitive? And this book is so helpful with that. Dick Eastman has 12 different categories that he talks about, and he shows you in scripture where you can find that this is an important component of prayer. And he walks you through each one of those with each chapter. And then if you spend 5 minutes on each thing, before you know it, you've prayed for an hour. The premise of this book kind of goes along with the disciples when Jesus was in the Garden of Gethsemane and, they were falling asleep, and the whole verse that says the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. And so your spirit is willing and you want to pray, but your flesh gets distracted or all over the place. And this is super helpful. So this is a book that I don't think I've fully implemented where I could, I haven't really spent a full 5 minutes on every single category, but it's easy to spend even just like 2 or 3 minutes. And by the time you've done 2 minutes, there you go. You've prayed for 25 minutes. You've prayed for almost half an hour. And that's huge. So some of the categories are praise, waiting, confession, praying scripture, intercession, petition, thanksgiving, meditation, listening. And so this has been really helpful. Peter, my husband, has actually taught through our church, actually gone through the chapters and practiced these elements of prayer in a prayer meeting, which is super cool as well. So it helps you to have a really well-rounded prayer life where you're not just coming to the God saying, thank you for this beautiful day. Thank you for this breath in my lungs. Here's a laundry list of requests of what I want or need. And then you go about your day. It actually has built-in times for listening to the Lord, for waiting upon the Lord, for praying scripture, for intercession, for your own requests, for all of those things. All of that is built in and really helps you have a well-rounded view on prayer. So it's not just this one aspect of prayer that you're focusing on. I found this book to be so incredibly helpful and also super practical. It is really easy to take your phone or, whatever, I guess you could do something else, and just set a timer for a couple of minutes or 5 minutes and pray on that subject. And then the timer goes off and you move on to the next one. And it's just really practical. The last book that I'm going to recommend here is actually one that's not specifically only on prayer. It's on a lot of spiritual disciplines, but it's also a really practical book, and that's why I wanted to recommend it. I don't even know if you can read the spine on this. It's like very worn. This is The Celebration of Discipline by Richard Foster. This is a book that talks about all kinds of spiritual disciplines, of which prayer is certainly one. It talks about inward disciplines, outward disciplines, and corporate disciplines, meaning disciplines that you do in a group, in a church setting. So it has things like meditation, prayer, fasting, study, submission, service, confession, worship, guidance, celebration, all kinds of different things. So it's not only about prayer, but I do think that the inward disciplines, 3 of the 4 inward disciplines that he goes over, do have to do with prayer. The reason I am suggesting this book is because of its practicality, and it gives you ideas of how you can pray. But in addition to that, what I found was really, really helpful was that it gives you specific tips on fasting, and it talks about how fasting as a spiritual discipline within the Old and New Testament, when it was talked about, it was something that was handed down from generation to generation. So you had your parents and your grandparents fasting with you and guiding you on how to fast, how to prepare your body for a fast, how to break a fast. And I thought that it was really, really helpful because that's something that it's a spiritual discipline that doesn't get talked about enough. That is a really, really key component with prayer, goes hand in hand with prayer. And it's something that when people do talk about it, they mention it, but there's not this like, this is how you actually prepare your body to handle a fast and to break a fast. And he talks about shorter fasts, but he also talks about extended fasts, because we see times in the Bible where people would fast for days, for weeks, for 40 days. We see things like that. And so he talks about how to prepare your body for a more extended fast beyond fasting, like say 1 meal. And I thought that that was so helpful and so practical. And again, a key component of prayer, fasting. So this book is a little bit of a cheat in that it's not solely about prayer, but it has some really, really practical advice on prayer and fasting. So those are 4 books that I have read or am currently in the process of reading about prayer that have changed my prayer life and or been very, very practical in assisting me to pray longer, to pray more effectively, to seek the Lord more effectively. You may notice that out of all these books that I've mentioned, they're all older books. I think the most recent book is actually The Celebration of Discipline by Richard Foster, and that was still written in maybe the 80s is the most recent book here. I tend to gravitate towards a lot of Christian classics, and I know that I gravitate towards regular classics as well, but I like to read books that have kind of stood the test of time in terms of their theology and their depth. So I do think that every single one of these books is written in a way that's understandable and accessible to the modern person. I don't think that these are super difficult books to read. I don't think that they have very challenging language. Of course, your mileage may vary, but especially the Oswald Chambers and the Andrew Murray book, both of those are quite old, but they're all written really understandably. And I prefer to recommend books that I feel like the theology is relatively sound in them and that they have stood the test of time. Sometimes I struggle with modern Christian literature because there's so much of it that is being put out all the time, and a lot of it has not yet been vetted. So if you're wondering why I've chosen mostly older books, that's why. I'd love to hear from you in the comments down below. Have you read any of these books? If so, what were your thoughts? And if you have any books that you have read on prayer, I would love it if you would put your recommendations in the comments below. Firstly, because I love to read books about prayer, but also it would be really helpful for others to see that as well. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please hit like and also subscribe so you can continue to see more bookish content from me, and I will see you again next time.